Hi everyone, my name is Dave Richards. I'm just going to talk you through a little bit of an exemplar kind of final assessment point. You should hopefully have been sent a document that gives this exemplar to you, or the example of the formal assessment point report. I've copied it out of an AP1 report that was taken last year. So this is actually for an end of year 1 induction as opposed to the final end of year 2. This is our first cohort through to the end of year 2, so I can't give you any actual examples of end of year 2 assessment point reports. But I think the style and the format is very much the same for what was required from the end of year 1 to the end of year 2, and in the sense that both of those are formal assessment points where the ECT needs to have that judgment made clearly against all of the teacher standards and give them those clear next steps for development. So this, like I said, is an example of a formal assessment point 1, end of year 1. So some of the content might differ slightly, but I think the formatting and the style, this is a good example of. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it is a real example, and I think it builds a little bit on what Roger was talking about previously, about that sort of ESI style, where you're kind of giving that evidence, the subject and the impact of where these judgments are coming from. You've had 2 years with your ECT now, so there should be plenty of statements that can be made against evidence of where that's come from. And I think what you see throughout this report, whichever standard you read for, that evidence is there, the impact is there, the standards are clearly linked to. I know that they are underneath each standard, but each substandard is linked to throughout the theme of the report. And I think it shows a really thorough understanding of the ECT's progress, where they've got that evidence from, the impact that it's having. And there are still some really clear areas for development. And although you are at the final assessment point, and I suppose the easy thing to do might be to not provide clear areas of development because they've passed induction, they've met their goal, everybody still moves on to somewhere next year, whether that's continuing in your school and moving on to whatever performance management process you may have within your school or academy, or whether they're moving on to somewhere else. I think it's really useful that there are some very clear areas of development for the ECT. So I won't go through the whole report because you can read it for yourself and see where these kind of strengths come through time and time again. But I think even just looking at the first 2 standards, so for TS1 and TS2 on here, some of the key strengths that come through in this report, and you see in other areas as well, is, like I said, those standards and sub-standards are linked throughout. So 1A, the ECT sets goals that stretch and challenge the most able students in his class, and he develops enthusiasm and passion of students through a subject area. And I think what's really good is you get that link then to where that evidence has come from. His joint observation on the 22nd of the 6th, 22, with the trust lead practitioner supported the growth and development in this area as the more able students were questioned and challenged on their misconceptions repeatedly. So it's got that link to the standard, link to the substandard. It's clear evidence for where that's come from. In this particular instance, we've got a specific date of an observation, a particular note included. I'm not saying that that's essential throughout, but it shows to me as an external eye reading this report that the person has a really thorough understanding of that ECT, where they've evidenced that progression, and what it is they need to do to further develop. So I think it's, without it being a hugely long report, if we pop back a slide, and you can see that the whole report takes 2 pages of a Word document, and probably could even still be slightly less than that. I know Roger spoke previously about keeping things succinct and how you can do that using that ESI style. This isn't an extremely long report, given that every single one of the standards is commented on in detail, but it is detailed enough that gives you a really thorough understanding where the ECT is at. And you see it again there in TS2. So they've proved they're accountable for student progression and outcomes, as well as being aware of pupils' prior knowledge, a common feature of the ECT's lesson. So it gives you that idea that there's consistency in that strength, and then a specific element. So it is the use of the blast in the past do now activities, which involves knowledge recall. Again, talks about the use of exit tickets. So again, we're seeing a specific example of where that ECT is meeting this standard in evidence, with really specific information about how they are meeting it. And I think for me, as someone who doesn't know the ECT, doesn't know the school, doesn't know the induction tutor potentially, when I read this, I still get a really good understanding of the progress that ECT has made and where they're at now in their career. And I think that continues on throughout the report, all the way through. And I think that's really important because we still need to make sure, like I said earlier, that we have those clear areas of development, those targets for the ECT to move forward on. And there are 2 listed in this one, which was obviously at the end of year 1. So they might be slightly different at the end of year 2, but I think you still need 2 to 3 clear targets for ongoing development. As I said, it might be that they're staying with you. Hopefully they are, and they're continuing then into whatever type of performance management or appraisal system that you have in your school, and they'll need targets for that linked to their teacher to standards. Or if they're moving on to a new school, a new academy, this report will obviously provide a really solid basis of a starting point for the development of them within a new setting. And I think doing them the favour, I think is even more important actually if they're moving on, that this is the case, doing them the favour of ensuring that this is accurate, detailed and clear about their strengths, but also their areas of development will allow them to get off to the best foot in their new setting. Again, these are clearly linked to the standards and substandards. You can see that the target and the action and the intended impact are all there. So, 60 needs to ensure that differentiates down as well as up. This will result in more pupils making effective progress and a reduction of low-level disruption, so we get the impact. The ECT needs to work on pitch and ensure that his lessons caters for the need of all students, not just higher ability. I would assume that if this was an end of year 2 report to the end of induction, that obviously any then appraisal systems that move on next year, that differentiation and pitch would be a target for them to work on throughout the year. And then we've got 7B around behaviour management and using the system that the school utilises. And again, it shows us that impact. And this will result in low-level disruption being more effectively dealt with and prevent any escalations resulting from inconsistencies in the behaviour management. So we've got really clear targets that show what the action is going to be, what the impact's going to be. And if this was to move into an action plan, I would then expect to see that higher level of detail about exactly what will happen by when. But in terms of a final assessment point, I think this is suitable. I think it's very clear for the ECT, anyone else working with them, that they know what those areas of improvement are. And I know there might be an inkling, I suppose, or a hesitation with some ECTs who are really strong, performing really well, to just pass them, sign them off, and not put those areas of development down. But everyone has areas of development. Every teacher, we know this, across all stages of their career, has areas of development. We are all need to be working against teacher standards in terms of where our strengths and areas of development lie. So please do take the time to ensure that these are clear, detailed and useful to the ECT in the next step to their development. So a report in total that would fill no more than 2 pages of Word is absolutely fine, using that ESI style that Roger talked about before to make sort of succinct but evidence-based statements about where this ECT is in terms of their progress. Every standard talked about, but it doesn't have to be a long essay for each one. It doesn't have to be overly descriptive. And then those clear areas of development against the standards at the end that shows what in their 3rd year of teaching this ECT will now move on to focus on as they move ahead in their development. And I think those are all the key elements that make a good report. And I think the example you've got, although there may be things that you think are not perfect for you or wouldn't work exactly in your setting, provides a good example of the structure and the kind of the style that this could be written in a way that keeps it as short as possible, but delivers a good level of detail for the ECT and anyone working with them. Thank you.